This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Hello, world, and welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. Today's sponsor is A2 Hosting. I've been using A2 Hosting solid state hosting solutions for our website at geekleader.com for many years now, and absolutely love their support, their service, and all the features that you get. You get access to cPanel. You get all of the things that you can imagine for a great WordPress experience, including their A2 optimized WordPress, which does extra security checks, extra lockdown. You can lock down your editor file so you can't edit anything inside there. You get alerts whenever there are file changes that are done. You can also do automatic updates, backups, and more with A2 Hosting. So highly recommend it. Go to geekleader.com/A2 to get more information and to sign up for their solid state turbocharged speed hosting today. Again, that's at geekleader.com/A2. All right, Geek Leaders, today I am honored to have Denis O'Shea on the show, and he is the founder of Mobile Mentor out of New Zealand, which is pretty awesome. And we're going to talk a lot about what's going on with mobile these days, and endpoint security, endpoint management. We'll talk a little bit about the endpoint ecosystem and privacy and cybersecurity, how that relates, a little bit about hybrid work and all kinds of other fun stuff that just fall out of us when we're having this conversation. Anyway, with all that being said, Denis, welcome to the show.
Thank you, John. Pleasure to be here.
If you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about how you got to where you are today in your career and what that journey's been like for you.
Oh, sure. So I started my career working for Nokia in the cell phone business back in the late 80s. And that was a really exciting time to come into it because it was a very, very new industry back then. I managed to spend 15 years building up Nokia's business in different countries around the world and had a fantastic ride. But at the end of that ride, I could see some big changes happening. And I decided to leave the business and set up my own company called Mobile Mentor. I set it up in New Zealand, and we built the business out from New Zealand to Australia, Brazil, China. And I've been in the USA exactly 5 years today. Getting into this market and doing all sorts of crazy things here in the US. So that's kind of what brought me to where I am today.
Awesome. So what exactly is it that you guys do at Mobile Mentor, and why would that be relevant to our audience today?
We're a managed service provider with a twist. We tend to focus on the modern hybrid workforce. Mm-hmm. So if you think about companies that have people working at home, in the office, traveling, probably using a wide range of devices, depending on where they are. And usually there's a lot of BYO technology as well. And we specialize in making all that technology secure and enabling people to be productive wherever they work. So we're not really confined to a classic traditional office-based environment with lots of on-premise infrastructure. It's more that ultra flexible, modern hybrid workforce. That's where we specialize.
And I'm guessing you've seen a big boom in that with COVID, and a lot more companies realizing that work from home and being remote is kind of feasible. When you had some traditional groups that were like, no, that's not happening here. But then COVID happens, they kind of have to, and they realize, hey, there's employees that are pretty productive when they're not in the office.
Exactly. Well, once upon a time, we used to look for customers who are mobile, mobile workers. Now, almost everybody is a mobile worker in some way, because we're kind of doing some work at home, some in the office, starting to travel again. So the need for security for a very flexible workforce has grown dramatically in the last couple of years. And what we're seeing, of course, is that people are using more or less the same applications and data across all their devices wherever they work. And their risk profile is much, much higher than it was before. So there's a massive need to try and help organizations not get hacked, not get ransomed, and enable their employees to be productive wherever they are.
Have you seen that, like maybe is it more prevalent when you have remote employees that are connecting back into a corporate office that puts that company more at risk than companies that the entire company is mobile, or is there a difference really?
I would almost say when the entire company is mobile, they're almost more secure, because then the infrastructure and everything is planned for a fully remote workforce or mobile workforce.
Right.
It's when you get a messy hybrid, we can see a lot of insecurities. And we've seen that, like through the pandemic. It was really sad to see how many organizations just told their staff, go home and figure out how to work at home. And in some cases, they took a work machine home, but because of the chip shortage, organizations couldn't always give a laptop or a desktop to new employees or to even to existing employees. So you had a situation where during the pandemic, people are in their home office, they're using a BYO laptop or desktop because the company couldn't supply one. They're connecting over a consumer grade internet connection, just using a domestic grade router. And that's being shared with the TikTok generation and the YouTubers and the Netflixers and all the rest of it. And people are doing their work, and they've got all their work applications and work data on that BYO device on a consumer grade internet connection. So suddenly the perimeter, if we think about security perimeters, the perimeter was suddenly no longer in the office where you've got a domain and a network and a firewall. It's out in suburbia. And all your employees are in different suburbs around the community on consumer grade internet connections. And that's where your data now lives. And that's where business happens. So yes, we became, as a society, we became incredibly vulnerable during the pandemic. And that's probably why we saw the 500% increase in cyber attacks.
Yeah, absolutely. I know of a company that when COVID happened, they were all in the office, a couple hundred employees. I don't know how many exactly, and they went remote, and they didn't have a way for employees to connect back. And naively, they assumed that, we'll just open up, extra VPNs and allow people to download this VPN client on whatever computer they're using at home and connect in that way. And they got hit with ransomware that came directly when they traced it back. It came directly from an employee that was at home, that came through the VPN.
Well, one of the big learnings from the pandemic was, we used to trust VPNs. We thought previously we could trust a VPN, and we thought we could trust our passwords. And we found out very quickly we can't trust those. They're both now considered legacy security tools, because we used to trust that whatever was on the other end of the VPN was secure. And in the case of your friend, unfortunately, whatever was on that machine in the home was not secure. And in the case of Colonial Pipeline, they assumed that whatever was on the other end of the VPN was secure, but it wasn't. And so the era of VPNs is very quickly coming to an end in our view. And we think that zero trust is the architecture that will replace the traditional castle and moat architecture, where you had an office and a domain and a VPN. Now it's going to be, are you a secure user? Is it really John Rhoda? And is his device a managed device that's up to date, patched, compliant? And if yes, we'll allow you through. And we don't need a VPN to do it then.
So let's say for the person that's listening today that may not know a whole lot about zero trust, maybe they're just a developer that works in a certain area where they haven't had to deal with it or talk much about cybersecurity. Give us the 10,000 foot view of what is zero trust.
I guess zero trust is the language used to describe a modern security paradigm that is completely different to what we call the castle and moat. The castle and moat was where we had an office, a network, a domain, and you assumed whatever was in your office was secure. And you assumed that whatever was outside your office was insecure. And we've seen that model break down over the last 10 or 12 years with, iPads and iPhones and laptops and all that. And it completely shattered during the pandemic, where more people were outside the office than in the office. So that old castle and moat model kind of broke down. The new model, called zero trust, basically assumes that every login attempt is a hack or a breach unless we explicitly verify that it's secure. So let's say you're trying to log into your company system. We're going to assume straight away it's a hack, it's a breach, unless we can verify it's actually you, John, on a correct domain. And we can quickly look up your credentials to see have they been found on the dark web anywhere. We might do a two-factor request to confirm it really is you. And then we can look at your machine to see, is it known? Is it managed? Is it compliant? Is the operating system up to date? Are your applications patched? And then we might permit you to come through to our corporate network. And then depending on which application you're trying to access, or which file, or which system you're trying to access, will determine, does this look dodgy, or does this look normal? And that set of decisions gets made in nanoseconds. But it's really, really smart, and it will allow the good people a really low friction or almost frictionless way of connecting to corporate resources, but throw a barrier straight away if it's a user we don't recognize, a machine that's not patched, coming in from an IP range that's unusual, or someone trying to access a file or a system that they wouldn't normally access. So the whole bunch of intelligence baked into that, and it's happening at speed, and it's much more reliable than trusting a VPN or a password.
So what kind of tools would people want to implement to do something like this? I mean, a lot of companies are already using Microsoft 365, and how can that be incorporated with this zero trust type of architecture?
So if we take the 365 example, so you've got Microsoft 365. So at the heart of that, you're going to have Azure AD, and in Azure AD, you have conditional access policies. And those policies are essentially the brain that will make a whole bunch of decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And so they will look at an access request coming in and saying, and look at the identity of the user to see first how compliant or how secure is that identity, and maybe then do a two-factor authentication request. If you're using biometrics, combine biometrics and single sign-on and multi-factor authentication to make the sign-in decision. Then you would use Microsoft Intune to see if the device is managed, if it's compliant, if the operating system is up to date, if the applications are patched. You might have Microsoft Defender, which is also part of the suite, to see can we see any known threats or viruses or bad code on this machine. And you combine those things together, and you get a holistic picture of what's going on with the person, the device, the applications, the data that's running on the machine that's trying to come into our environment. And those
So
conditional access.
all that kind of works together. And those rules like set up in the Azure AD, like in organizational unit or something like that, or how does it know, like when I go to log in, and let's say someone shared something, I want to go to our SharePoint site or something like that to view content and data. How does it know to check Intune or to check whatever to see if the device I'm coming from is actually good and block it? Is that something is it licensed through like advanced threat protection, or is it something?
It is. So your Microsoft 365 license will include the different tools I mentioned before, Azure AD, which has the conditional access rules. So those rules are what makes a determination. So you might have, and you can set these rules as granular as you want, but you might say, we only want managed machines to be able to connect, and we only want machines that are patched to version N-1 to be able to come in, and that have application updates in the last month or something like that, or certain versions. And you'll have a set of rules that will allow people to come through. You might have different set of rules for BYO devices. If you're using a personal smartphone that's not managed by the company, but you've got Outlook on it, or you've got Teams on it, you might have some policies that say, we will allow John to open an attachment, but he can't save it to Google Drive.
Right.
He can't take a screenshot of the content. He can't forward that email to Gmail. And so you can define a set of rules around how people can treat your data on either a managed device owned by the company or an unmanaged device owned by the employee. And all of these controls are configurable inside the Microsoft 365 console.
Awesome. So it's all, it's possibly that a lot of companies already have the tools to do a lot of these things that we're talking about. They don't even realize it.
It's like, I think of it like a Christmas stocking. It's like, they've bought this, they've been gifted or bought this Christmas stocking that's full of goodies. And some people haven't even looked inside to see what's there. Like there's so much capability inside a suite like Microsoft 365. Many organizations just haven't got to turn it all on and join the dots and get it all working together. And that's where the value is not just in using one or two parts, but whatever tools that you're using. When you join all the dots together and get the intelligence working, it's unbelievably powerful. Unbelievably powerful. And particularly if you think about that modern remote worker who's probably using Teams all day, using Outlook, using OneDrive, maybe SharePoint, Excel, Word, PowerPoint, all those applications, the way they integrate and pass signals between them and telemetry and intelligence and make it super easy if you are a good user, but make it incredibly difficult if you're a bad actor. The way all that is woven together is really, really clever. And setting that up right, that's a lot of the work we do, and helping organizations try and get the balance right between security and employee experience. Because if security is seen as a barrier and a pain in the ass, then people will kind of push back against it or find ways around it. But if we can make security invisible by making it woven into everything we do, and by joining the dots and making security silent and invisible, people don't even notice it. and then they have a great experience.
Yeah, I think when you look at security, there's that inconvenience factor, and I think a lot of executives and maybe even leaders in technology sometimes fear the pushback that they'll get.
Yeah.
Even though that it's not as great as they think. And I remember I go back several years ago now when we rolled out multi-factor authentication on our systems, and we said it was mandatory. We tried to push that, a year earlier than we did, and it got pushed back saying, no, that nobody's going to want to get a text message or get an authenticator app on their phone that they have to approve. Nobody's going to do that. That's just too much effort. And then we pushed it out, and I don't think we had maybe one out of 500 people complain. It's and that person's just like, I don't want to give you my mobile phone number. Well, then don't use the authenticator app. You're good.
Yeah, exactly. And we still see pushback in some communities where people push back and they might say something silly like, it's my personal phone and I don't want to have to use my personal phone to have an authenticator app to hit approve. And then in those cases you can say, okay, fine, we'll give you a USB key instead. One of those FIDO keys, and you can plug that in to do your two-factor if you don't want to use your personal phone. People get sick of that in about 2 weeks, and they kind of eventually say, okay, it's just easier on my phone. Hit the approve.
We were using RSA back at the time before we switched over to the solution we're using now. And RSA, if they didn't want the app on their phone, we'd give them a token. You have to carry around a token that had numbers on it. And just like, oh, just give it to me on my phone.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly the same now with those USB keys. Yeah, people use them for a short time and go, this is too hard. There are easier ways of doing it. And that's the whole point. Is that
and I feel like the pushback is less than what you think it's going to be. And I remember we were thinking that, we're probably going to get hundreds of calls of people complaining about this. And it's like, no, just one.
Did you do good communication beforehand? Tell people
why? We did. We did a lot of the whys and what the impact would be if there was an issue and how it could affect everybody, and what the disaster would be with the company as far as valuation. Like, we put down a lot of data behind, what an attack cost, what's the cost of a breach, and not just financially, but also on your time. If somebody in a different department gets breached because their password's insecure, or maybe they do have a secure password, but they reused it somewhere else and it got taken, and we don't have multi-factor authentication, and that password is easily reused here, then the entire company could be shut down for not just an hour, but we're talking like a week or more. And we use the example of code spaces. I don't know if you ever heard about code space. So that was the use case that really got people fired up about multi-factor authentication probably a decade ago. They were a code repository. Imagine GitHub, but I think they use it was kind of like GitHub, but much smaller. But they were a code repository where developers would store their source code in the cloud.
Yeah.
And they did not have multi-factor authentication on their administrative accounts for AWS. They ended up getting hacked. And this kind of played out live on Twitter, which was really cool. I remember following this live on Twitter when it was happening. The CEO of CodeSpaces tweeted out like, we are under attack right now. Someone's taking our accounts. And he was tweeting the whole story, which was really kind of neat, but also, not. But basically they ended up deleting their backups first. And they asked for this huge ransom. The guy said, we're never going to pay a ransom, and didn't realize his backups were already deleted. And then they deleted basically all of their data in AWS. And then they went back and saw that their backups were already deleted prior to that, like weeks ago. and then they were screwed. They had nothing. The company ended up going out of business. They only, I think they had like 40 or 50 employees. They all lost that. And not only that, there were more than 100 companies that had their source codes stored there that lost that active source code that they had. So a lot of companies that they didn't have offsite backup somewhere, they were also, in a pickle. So it turned out to be a pretty good use case that you can use for multi-factor authentication.
Yeah.
And also not reusing passwords.
Exactly. And I think now the stats show that about 60% of small businesses that get hit with ransomware end up going out of business. It's just too crippling.
That's crazy.
The cost of the ransom and then the recovery and the implications to their business and reputation.
Yeah.
It's just
now, like cybersecurity insurance has gotten so expensive over the last couple of years. It's almost unaffordable for small businesses to get it.
And it will be unobtainable. I've actually got a friend who is a CISO, and he's advising insurance companies how to protect themselves because they got slammed really bad, having to, pay out some of the ransoms. And they're now basically putting up walls to say, unless you have your security house in order, we're not going to insure you. It's almost like having a house on the edge of a cliff. Insurance companies are going to laugh at you and say, no, there's no way we're going to give you a policy to protect your house.
Yeah, I know when we renewed our insurance, they wanted to come on site, do a site evaluation. We had to send them like the I don't remember if it was the agreements with our endpoint solution, or maybe it was invoices where we showed that we had purchased the actual endpoint protections that we were using, where we showed that we had purchased the backup software that we were using, and we sent them screenshots of logs. Like, they wanted all this stuff to renew our insurance when it came up time. Just because, and they said, basically, hey, if we want to renew you at the same rate, we need all this evidence now, because so many companies have been hit the last 2 years that we can't just take people's words for it anymore.
Yeah, but that's good in a way that they're doing
it's very good
due diligence, because if that helps you keep your premium down, that's a good thing. Otherwise, premiums are just going to skyrocket. Just going to get out of control.
Yeah.
Hey,
so one thing go ahead.
I was just going to say the story you had about rolling out MFA was really interesting, and about your communication. We got some phenomenal insights from some research we did earlier this year to understand what's actually happening out in the front line of the workforce. We wanted to understand, from the perspective of all the millions of people working in home offices, how they perceive security and the balance between security and privacy. And one of the really interesting things I wanted to share is that the young workers coming into the workforce, like Gen Z, they're almost blind to security. So when companies talk about security and security policies and tools and initiatives, Gen Z don't really notice or see or hear or recall. But when we talk to them about privacy, they are absolutely listening. They're hyper aware when it comes to privacy. And so we think there's some really important guidance here for IT leadership, in that if you are rolling out anything new, if you reframe it as a privacy initiative, you get everyone's attention. If you talk about it as a corporate security initiative, they glaze over. And so, for example, if we say, hey, John, we're doing this rollout or this piece of work to protect your personal information. We want to make sure your social number never leaks. We want to make sure your salary information and all your personal data never leaks in the web or gets sold or ends up on the dark web. And the same for your colleagues and for our customers. That message has phenomenal cut through, in particular for young workers who really get privacy in a way that they don't get corporate security.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense, because when you look at a company, all their employee records are there. You have information about your insurance companies. You have your insurance that you're using. You have your information about how much money you make. You have your social security number, your address, your phone number. And if that gets breached, then that's a very personal thing to the employees that work there.
Yeah, that's very serious. Yeah. So that message.
So tell me about the study and how you guys conducted it, and what the process was like.
The process was, we surveyed 1,000 people across the US and 500 people in Australia. So we picked 2 geographically diverse countries. And we picked 4 highly regulated industries that we assumed would have their house in order when it comes to security. So we picked healthcare, education, finance, and government. And we went and surveyed all these people to understand what's actually going on for them in their home office setting. So if you think about, most people have a number of devices on their desk, and they've got, different applications and all this going on. And we wanted to understand the realities of security for those people, the realities of what they're facing on a daily basis, and how they perceive the balance between security and their experience as an employee. And we sliced the data by generation. And that was super interesting to see how Gen Z differs so much from, say, Gen X. And then we also sliced it by people who were onboarded during the pandemic. And we looked at by people who were onboarded in an office setting and people who were onboarded remotely, because they had a very different experience. And so some of the data and the insights we got was really, really interesting. So if I share a couple with you, one of them was what's going on with passwords blew us away. So we all knew that everyone had too many passwords. What we didn't realize is how fatigued people are with passwords, how just sick and tired people are. And we found that 2/3 of people now admit that they find the easiest possible way to create a password. And we know from other research, 15% of people base their password on their pet's name, or pet's name and a combination of something else, last four of social or date of birth, whatever. And the most surprising thing of all is what we call password hygiene, where people store their passwords and how they store them. And we found that the penetration of password management tools is woefully low. And 31% of people actually write their work passwords in a personal notebook in their home environment. And 21% of people store their work passwords on an app on their personal phone. And 22% of people use an Excel spreadsheet that's stored somewhere else, like Dropbox or a Word document. So what people are doing with their passwords is almost as bad as the fact that we're lazy in creating them. And yes, we have reuse, and we tend to cluster our passwords. We might have the same one for, our social accounts or our streaming accounts or financial accounts. And so there's a major, major problem going on right now with password management and password hygiene.
Yeah, so I know about 3 years ago, we did a pen test, and we hired a local company to come by and do our internal and external pen tests and things like that. And he took a different spin on pen tests than what we've had before. We usually rotate between a couple of different companies. So 1 year we have one company, another year we have another company. And this is at this time, this was our first year using this other company. And he came in, he did his pen test, but the results weren't just like, here's all your vulnerabilities, here's where we got in here. His results were, here's that, but here's the impact of what I could have done with that. So after he got in, he discovered a text file like you talked about. It was in a folder, in a department, and it had all social media passwords for the accounts. So he posted an example, like it was a screenshot of, here's a post that I could have put on your, Twitter profile. It was like, contest, click here to put in this. And it was to capture people's information of our customers. And it was all fake. They went to one of his websites, and he's like, and here's something I could have done on your YouTube channel, and like had a show like, he's like, what do you think the impact would be if I uploaded this naughty video on your YouTube channel? And like all these little things like of what could have happened. And the impact of that made a lot more than just, here's your vulnerabilities, like what could have happened. But because of that, we ended up rolling out Password Manager, a password management solution to all employees. Just like, here it is. Here's a tool you can use. You only have to remember one password, and after that, there's nothing else to remember. Anything else that you need, it's going to generate auto passwords for everything. It does, the Watchtower thing where it shows you all the breaches that you're a part of and sends you alerts. And we're going to push that out to everybody, and everybody gets a password manager. Use it for whatever. Create your personal vault, create your work vault. We don't care. It's yours.
Yeah. And that's great. And that's probably the second best thing you could do. The best thing you can do is go passwordless. And you asked me before about the Microsoft 365 suite. That suite now has all the tools you need to go fully passwordless. So that the nirvana state is a new employee joins a company. On day one, you might give them like a 4-digit temporary password, or 4-digit temporary PIN to get into the machine. But then they do the full biometric scan, and they go through all that, and they validate and authenticate themselves. And from then on, it's biometrics only, like sitting in front of a laptop or a smartphone or a tablet. And then they get into the machine, and then it's single sign-on and multi-factor authentication with an app, and all those conditional access policies and all that takes over. And from then on, there's no passwords.
Yeah, so that's great for things that can be integrated with Azure AD. But then when you get into like, your marketing department that needs a Facebook login and a Twitter login, and, there's things that aren't necessarily integrated with Azure AD, they have to have a password for that. You got to still have to have some way to manage that,
Yeah, I think we're seeing nowadays most applications do have the ability, they're SAML compliant. So you can do single sign-on and at least federate them with Azure AD. And generally our guidance to clients is that if you're choosing new applications, mandate single sign-on as one of the conditions. Mandate it, and only choose applications that are SAML 2.0 compliant, so you can make it part of your single sign-on portfolio. And
I think that's
you would just get away from passwords.
Yeah, I think that's the bare minimum requirements, that it has to be single sign-on.
And so the faster we can go passwordless as a society, the better. Because if you think about it, passwords were a great invention in 1961. And then we found out in 2021 that the primary reason everyone's getting hacked. So we're still reliant on the 60-year-old technology idea. And we've got more of them going on than ever before. So we just as a society, we have to kick the habit. We just have to get past.
So what's the adoption rate that you're seeing when it comes to passwordless? Because that seems to be kind of like the next thing that companies need to be doing. We went from basic passwords to complex passwords to passphrases. Now we're going passwordless. Like, what's the adoption rate to that point?
It's extremely high on smartphones. So most people don't even realize they're doing passwordless. But if you have an iPhone and you pick it up and it looks at your face and you got, Face ID, you're into the iOS operating system, and then you're single sign on to your trusted apps, and you might have multi-factor for your bank account. So most people are already fully passwordless on a smartphone. As we deploy more and more laptops with a TPM 2.0 chip that has encryption, and you can do like Windows Hello, then you can get that same experience on laptops and desktops. So the technology building blocks are being deployed in greater numbers every year. So the capability is there, and most organizations are somewhere on the journey between, 0 and 100 on passwordless. Everyone's somewhere on the journey. There are not many. I haven't seen many organizations that are already fully passwordless. I haven't seen many, but I know a lot of organizations have that on their plan for this year to, get the hell out of Dodge, get away from these passwords and just get over the line on it. And if necessary, end of life, create an end of life event for legacy applications that will not lend themselves well to a modern SSO capability. So we're seeing a sense of urgency now that we didn't see in previous years, which is really good.
And you think a lot of that came from, COVID and the lockdown where people were working from home, and that spurred then the huge increase of cyber attacks, because companies just kind of said, well, you have to work from home, so we're going to kind of open the door. We're going to peek open a little crack in it over here in the firewall, let you like remote in and do some things that you're not supposed to do. That led to this huge increase in cyber events. Do you think that has kind of let the pendulum swing back the other way and push people to do things for improvement of cybersecurity?
It has, to a certain extent, but I think the fact that there's been so much public disclosure around hacks and ransoms, that has actually scared the bejesus out of many company leaders. And they realize now that it's happening to others. It's happening to our local school. It's happening to our local city council. It's happening to other businesses. People realize now that it's not a case of if, it's when. We used to talk about there were two kinds of companies, those who got hacked and those who didn't. Sorry, those who got hacked and those who didn't know they'd been breached. Because the breach is usually in your network for, I think it's between 6 and 8 months before they exploit it. But now what we're seeing is there are two kinds of companies. There are those who have been hacked and those who've been hacked again. So we're seeing the hackers come back multiple times to the same company where they did get payment for, some kind of ransom, or they got some kind of valuable data, and they're going back to the well because it was worth their while.
So are we seeing more companies or hackers, that are exfiltrating data and using that against the company? Or is it more like we're just going in there and encrypting things?
I think
what's
it's
more
more
prevalent?
the latter, and just looking for a payout.
Yeah,
I think that's still more prevalent.
I guess that requires less infrastructure and less work to actually than the exfiltration and the sell of the data.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So, what was some other findings that you found during the study that are really stood out to you as being unique?
Some of the drivers behind shadow IT were really interesting. So, shadow IT has been a problem for a long time, but we think we got a good grip on what's driving it, and the driver is people feel like their company security policies are too restrictive, and 42% of people told us, my company security policies are too restrictive, so I find ways to work around them. And then we ask questions like people's preference for the tooling they use, and a phenomenal 57% of people in business told us they prefer using Gmail and Dropbox over all the Microsoft applications. Now that's quite a tragic finding, because more than likely the company is paying for the Microsoft suite of products. And as we look at the different generations, the numbers were much worse for Gen Z being 20 to 24 years old, most recently arrived in the workforce, probably joined during the pandemic, and then most recently came out of the education system where they were using Gmail and G Suite and Dropbox. And we think what's happening is that they come into the workforce, they're learning Windows and Office and Teams and all this stuff, But when they have to do something like share a very large file with an external organization, or when they're in a hurry or under pressure or stressed, that's when their behavior falls back on things they know and they're comfortable with, Gmail or Dropbox. And they might just say, hey, it's just easier if I send you this file on Gmail. There's no restriction on the size. Or let me just spin up a little Dropbox folder and we'll collaborate on that. And that's where the problem starts. So we think it's that sentiment that my company security policies are too restrictive. So I'm going to do a little thing on the side.
Yeah. So one of the things that I was having a conversation with someone, probably, I don't remember, several months ago now, about shadow IT and some of the ways to kind of embrace shadow IT in a way of using, kind of telling people, okay, you don't like our restrictive policies. We're going to give you more, but we're going to do it using some of our same stuff. So for example, let me clarify. We're going to give you low-code tools and let you kind of develop your own workflows using some of the Microsoft tools that are there with Power BI. We're going to give you, we're going to expand your storage capabilities by giving you an E5 license or something like that that gives you unlimited storage on OneDrive. Provide more training on how to use these tools and promote the fact that you don't need to come to IT to have this request. You can handle it yourself, but it's going to be following our policies. And in doing so, we're going to block access to Dropbox, Google Drive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What are your thoughts on that kind of take?
I think that is fantastic. If you have people in the organization who are self-starters and have an entrepreneurial instinct, and you can give them low-code tools and kind of nurture this we call them citizen developers. So they don't need to be geeks who understand coding, but they can do WYSIWYG kind of code development and build workflows using Power Automate and build simple apps using Power Apps, and then display dashboards rather than building reports using Power BI. That's fantastic. You get people doing that. You do need to provide some adult supervision across the top. And to your point, you might say, we're going to open up the following library of APIs so you can connect to these resources and pull in these data feeds, and you can publish the following, but you might restrict the things you don't want them to do. So sorry, we don't have the Dropbox API, or we don't have the Google Drive API, but you can absolutely publish it to our SQL server, or regional SQL server, or OneDrive, or whatever. And so as long as there's some adult supervision in kind of setting up the framework, we've seen tremendous success with this. There's a great case study. I think it was either British Airways or one of the big airports in London, might have been Heathrow Airport actually, where some of the staff decided, we're sick of doing paperwork, all these stupid paper forms. We can digitize a lot of these inspections we do and safety procedures. And so they went off and they developed a whole bunch of apps, and there was no technical people involved. So that kind of innovation is delightful to see.
It is. And I think a lot of people don't realize how many tools are actually out there. I remember when we were going through a digital transformation a while back, we realized that in our company, we had, multiple different project management suites that people were being used.
Yes.
They were using like Trello and Asana and Monday and all these things. And it's like, you know what? Microsoft has Planner, and it does like 90% of the things that you want. Let me just introduce it to you and teach it to you and see if it's something you're interested in. And we found like this huge adoption of people wanting to use Planner and using tools that are kind of controlled with Microsoft. And oh, by the way, you can share this now. You can attach things to it. You can link it with Teams. You can create a team site that integrates with it and is fully integrated with people that you're working with, and have updates and live notifications, and, get people excited about the tools that they didn't even know they already had. And I think that's kind of the area that you want to just kind of steer people to.
Absolutely. We saw the same with communication tools. We as a company for a while were using Slack, Teams, Zoom, Confluence, and Citrix GoToMeeting. And it was a mess because different teams would use different tools. And we eventually said, look, we've just got to rein this in, and we're going to standardize, and we're going to pick one. We picked Teams. And that was a good decision because, for me, it's not just what happens during the meeting, but it's all the collaboration that happens outside the meeting. And the fact you can share links and files and have chat, and there's a whole bunch of resources you can attach to the meeting. It just makes it so easy.
Oh yeah, and the integration with Outlook and the other tools that you're using in SharePoint.
Yeah.
We chose Teams as well. We were using Slack and Zoom and Teams and all that. We ended up standardizing on Teams corporately as well. I think that's been a great choice, especially with your mobile phone, the way it connects to your iPhone. You can just use that or your tablet. It doesn't matter, and how you can transfer calls back and forth. Like we're on a call now, and if I need to get up, I just put on my earbuds. I get up, hit transfer to my phone, and I don't miss a beat.
It's phenomenal how good that transfer functionality is now.
Absolutely.
I need to go and jump in the car to pick up my daughter, and we can continue the conversation. I can come back and sit at my desk again. It's truly amazing. If I, having come from the communications industry, if you had described that to me 10, 20 years ago, I would have called BS. Because back then we were struggling to just do a handover on the highway, maintain a cell phone call as you're driving down the highway at 60 or 70 miles an hour. That was really hard work. That required a huge amount of intelligence. But actually be able to switch devices for a video call with a whole bunch of files and attachments going on at the same time, and maintain that across devices and changing network, going from your home Wi-Fi out to your car, getting on cellular. That's a phenomenal handover that's actually happening.
It is. And if you look at like technology today, if you took this back 50 years ago and showed people what we're doing today, it would be nothing short of magic. It would be magic. Oh, you're actually seeing a live video of someone across the world right now. And not only that, I can transfer it across devices. I can do it without a wire. It's amazing.
And the fact that there's zero latency. You can have a very natural human conversation with no latency on the call. That's amazing.
I mean, you remember just 10 years ago, or maybe it's longer than that, when there's, weather coverage between a hurricane, and the person would talk and then they would wait. The news person would just sit there and nod their head, wait, 30 seconds, and then, oh, yes. And they would answer the question that was just asked. And now we don't have that at all. We can have a conversation like this across the globe.
Yeah. Remember when there was almost a 5-second delay for making a phone call? Having a long distance phone call on Christmas Day, and the delay was just terrible.
Well, Dennis, I really enjoyed this conversation. How can people learn more about what you guys do at Mobile Mentor, and get some more information on this endpoint ecosystem study that you guys did, and connect with you online?
Sure. So the endpoint ecosystem study, everything's online. We put it all online to share it free. So it's on a website called the endpointecosystem.com. And you can just go there and download any of the research papers or documents. And then our company, we're a managed service provider, and we specialize in modern hybrid workforces and helping them get the balance right between security and the employee experience. So it's mobile-mentor.com is the website. And then for me personally, it's Denis O'Shea. I'm on LinkedIn. That's the only social platform I'm on. I don't really do social media, but I'm on LinkedIn, reasonably active. So you'll find me there. And it's been a real pleasure chatting to you and talking about some of the technology paradigms and where security is going. And if there's one piece of advice I can share with your audience, it's get away from passwords. Let's leave that era behind. We're going to look back on passwords and we're going to laugh in the way we laugh at some of the old technologies we've now, kicked away, like faxes and all that. We're gonna laugh at passwords. Sooner we can get there and be able to laugh.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And Dennis, I really appreciate it. I'll link all that up in the show notes too at geekleader.com. Thanks so much. If you enjoyed that episode, please leave a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. I'd greatly appreciate that. And also, don't forget to check out merch. We have some t-shirts that I've designed that are on at geekleader.com. You can click on the merchandise section there and check that out. And also, don't forget about the books from our guests. So if you like this guest and other guests that have written books, please go ahead and check that out at geekleader.com. I would greatly appreciate it, and I'm sure they would too.